My story began at that unforgettable party where I met Max. This moment became the starting point in my life. Fate intervened in our meeting. Max was a great gentleman. His charm and smile drew attention to me like a magnet. We spent this evening like magic, and time seemed to stand still, allowing us to enjoy the moment. My impressions of him were amazing. Max was attentive, caring, and funny. He was able to entertain and keep up a conversation, and each of our meetings was like a new episode of a romantic story. The following days and weeks became happy days of initial attraction for us. Over time, our relationship has become deeper and more serious. Everything seemed too good to be true. A few years later, our relationship developed into a real and indescribable love. So without the slightest doubt, it's time for the wedding. We decided that our union should be forever, and our wedding was a joyful and bright event filled with happiness and hope. My heart was beating in time with every note of the music that day, and I was burning with the desire to build our future together. On this day, everything around us seemed transformed. The sun shone brighter, the flowers seemed more colorful, and the moment when Max took my hand to lead me to the altar was like a fairy tale. We made vows of love and loyalty, and I believed that our story would be a fairy tale that would never end. Everything seemed perfect, but I couldn't help but notice that after that wedding, Max began to change. At first, it was small misunderstandings that seemed insignificant. We discussed how we see our future, and sometimes our opinions differed. But I thought it was normal, because in any relationship there are small differences, right? But gradually other changes began. Max became more and more restrained and impenetrable. Instead of talking, as before, he withdrew into himself. We spent nights in silence, and I understood that he was hiding something important. Our misunderstandings became deeper and deeper, and my attempts to find out what was going on did not bring results. Max brushed off the conversations as if he didn't want to share his feelings with me. In those moments, I felt lonely and helpless. Our relationship, which seemed so strong and close, began to disintegrate. But I couldn't accept that our happiness was disappearing. But the more I tried, the more Max became remote. This uncertainty and split in our relationship has become a part of my daily life. Desperate to understand what was going on, I decided to turn to his family and friends. They were closer to him. Maybe they knew something that he was hiding from me. But their answers were cryptic and disappointing. They said that Max was just like that at times, and that it was normal in a marriage. I couldn't accept that answer. Max was the man I loved, and I refused to believe that our relationship could end this way. But the more I learned, the more it seemed to me that something sinister lurked inside Max. We discussed the future, and Max always said what I wanted to hear, but deep inside I had a feeling that he was hiding his true intentions. Masking problems has become our daily reality. Max was a master of persuasion and manipulation, able to mask the true essence of what was happening. He was telling me what I wanted to hear, convincing me that everything was fine, but something in my soul screamed that it wasn't. It was hard to believe that a man I loved so deeply could hide something so important from me. This masking of problems corroded our relationship. But one day, everything turned out in a completely unexpected way. We were standing in our bedroom, and suddenly Max said something I couldn't even imagine. From his lips came the words, "Get out of my house." This phrase was uttered with such incredible cold-blooded confidence that I was seized with panic and despair. I was left standing in front of the closed door, stunned, not understanding what had happened. "Max, what are you saying? This is our home, our relationship." My words trembled, but Max just looked at me with an indifferent expression in his eyes. "I'm sick of it, Kate. Get out." He repeated the phrase as if it was the last thing he wanted to say. This dramatic moment turned out to be the point of no return when Max kicked me out of our house. This cold confidence in his voice tore the ground from under my feet. In an instant, everything we had built collapsed, and I was left alone. My fingers were knocking on the closed door. I couldn't believe that Max, whom I loved so deeply, could kick me out of our own home. "Why, Max?" I whispered, hoping for some kind of answer. But his face remained indifferent, as if he was a person I no longer knew. "It's not working, Kate," he said, as if justifying his actions. "We'd better go our separate ways." I couldn't understand what had happened and why he did it. After leaving home, I turned to friends to find support. My loved ones were stunned by what happened, and they immediately started asking questions. "What's wrong, Kate?" my friend Sarah asked. I sighed and tried to explain the situation to her. "Max kicked me out of the house, and I do not know why. He became somehow mysterious." Sarah exchanged glances with other friends, and I realized that they started discussing it behind my back. "Kate, surely you have an idea what could have caused this behavior?" her husband, Michael, asked. I honestly admitted that I can't find any obvious reason, but my friends didn't give up. Their attention to detail was amazing. "Maybe it's stress at work. Maybe he's hiding something serious," but none of the ideas seemed convincing. While my friends and I were trying to solve the mystery of Max's behavior, memories of happiness in our relationship flashed through my head. The days when we first started dating seemed so far away. We laughed, talked, and spent days filled with joy and hope. All these moments when Max was caring and attentive became a bright memory for me, which now seemed lost. I remembered how he gave me flowers, how we walked in the park, how he shared his dreams and plans for the future. But now it all seemed like a distant dream. They reminded me that our history was not always so difficult and incomprehensible, that once we had real happiness. And I kept hoping that I would find answers and bring back this bright side of our love, as if fate itself decided to reveal Max's dark secret. That day, while I was tidying up our things, my fingers came across something cold and hard hidden in the back corner of a drawer in his room. I took out a small envelope. Its edges were noticeably worn out by time. My heart started beating faster when I opened it. There were photos hidden inside the envelope, and they showed Max and a woman I couldn't recognize at first glance. My hand was shaking as I looked at these photos. They showed Max in hugs and kisses with this woman. My heart was bleeding from the pain, and tears began to pour into my eyes. I couldn't believe my eyes. My world collapsed, and Max's betrayal turned out to be impossible for me to contain. On the one hand, there was me, Kate, a woman who always believed in her love for Max. On the other, photos, a terrible truth that could not be ignored. I wanted to deny the fact of infidelity, hoping that it was some kind of terrible nightmare. But the photos were too real, too convincing to be written off as fantasy. I couldn't believe that Max, the man I loved so deeply, could betray me. Every day the mystery of Max's behavior became more and more confusing, but at the same time I began to get hints from his friends about what was behind that mystery. One day at one of the parties where Max's friends gathered, one of them, Daniel, came up to me and said in a whisper, "Kate, you need to know the truth. That woman in the photos. This is Max's old friend. Her name is Lisa." My heart stopped. Lisa was a name I rarely heard, but every time it was pronounced, there was a special note in Max's voice. Max's friends told me a story that he skillfully hid from me. Lisa was a woman from his past who had once been his lover, but their relationship ended painfully and destructively. She left his life, but found herself back in it, and their old feelings flared up with renewed vigor. Now I understood that the photos were proof not only of betrayal, but also of Max's return to his past. When I decided to find some hints about his past from his old friends, one of them, Michael, told me the truth, which Max stubbornly denied. Michael said that all of Max's friends had long known about his abusive behavior in the past. "Kate, we're sorry you had to deal with this," he said. "We always knew that Max is not what he seems. He was an abuser in a past relationship, and this was the reason for his unpredictable behavior." My eyes filled with tears and my heart was torn apart. I couldn't believe that a person I loved and trusted so deeply could become an abuser. I read his diary, and with each new detail that I learned about Max's past, my heart broke more and more. He described his mental illnesses, fears, and panic attacks. He could not control his emotions and reactions, and this led to abusive behavior. One of the entries became particularly important. In it, Max confessed his true feelings. "I married her trying to forget Lisa, my ex-girlfriend. I was afraid of losing Lisa and couldn't accept our separation. She was my first true love, and I couldn't forget her." This confession revealed Max's fear of losing his ex-girlfriend and his inability to cope with this loss. He married me hoping that a new love would erase his old wounds. But his mental illnesses and demons were stronger than his desire to start a new life. My disappointment was deep, and I understood that I could not stay in a relationship where I was used and betrayed. Max was no longer the person I was in love with, and although I understood his struggle with the disease, it did not justify his actions and betrayal. When Max kicked me out of our house, I had no choice but to go to my parents. He took my phone away from me, and I was left without communication and for a while. So despite my fatigue and emotional state, I had to walk. I wanted to walk this path myself, as a symbol of my independence and determination. Every step was an act of liberation. At some point I stopped to rest under the roof of a small gas station. There I met an old man who treated himself to hot coffee from a thermos. His words were like consolation and support at that moment. A few more hours passed when I finally saw my parents' house on the horizon. Wet and cold, I went to their door and knocked. My mother opened the door and hugged me tightly, as if I had returned from a long journey. As the days passed in my parents' house, I began to remember those rare moments of happiness and joy that Max and I shared. These memories were like bright moments, and I wanted to keep them in my memory. I realized that red flags and warnings should not be ignored, even if falling in love muddies the mind. Over time, I learned more about Max's life before we met. It turned out that his relationship with Lisa was far from ideal. Lisa was a woman of strong will and independent, but she could not tolerate Max's aggressive behavior. They constantly quarreled, and this jeopardized their relationship. Max has always been a manipulator, and he used his charms to convince Lisa to marry him. But their marriage turned out to be unhappy and full of conflicts. Lisa left, and Max was left alone. I met a man who turned out to be a real support in my life. He was a rich and successful man, but more importantly, he was an understanding and caring partner. He helped me recover from abusive relationships and supported me in my aspirations for self-realization. I knew my life wouldn't be the same anymore. I became stronger and more confident in myself, and most importantly, I found a person who appreciated me and supported me in everything. That's how the story ended, which began with the party where I first met Max.